Welcome to America's Heroes Group.
And welcome back to America's Heroes Group. This time with our roundtable, our partner, the National Coalition of Homeless Veterans, the NCHV. Today is Saturday, May 21st, 2022. May is Mental Health Awareness and Military Caregiver Month. Our host is Kelley. I'm Sean Claiborne, U.S. Army National Guard veteran. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. We have a couple of familiar voices. We've had them on our show before. Kathryn Monet, she's the Chief Executive Officer of the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans, and Ralph Cooper. He's a Community and Residential Veteran Services Coordinator of Cloudbreak Houston, LLC. He's also the co-founder of the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. And we're going to talk about mental health. How you guys doing today?
We're great. How are you?
Fine. Thank you.
We're doing really well. So what do we need to know about, the challenges of, being homeless, and then also how that affects your mental health? So, Monet, can you tell us a little bit, Ms. Monet, a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, so I think the first thing to remember is that there is this really big myth out there that all veterans experiencing homelessness are facing mental illnesses, and some of them are, and some of them aren't, right? And I do think that, homelessness and mental health conditions are kind of mutually reinforcing, right? Where having a mental health condition can make you a little bit more likely to become homeless, but being homeless can also cause the onset of mental health conditions. So it's this really interesting cyclical issue that can spiral out of control if not addressed well.
Mr. Cooper, what can you add to that? Because I've witnessed this myself. I've seen during the housing crisis just how many people, just through the process of losing their home, who weren't necessarily out on the street, but just couch surfing, not having necessarily a security of where they're going to sleep at night, that driving someone to the point where you see that their mental health is deteriorating. What can you add to that from your experience?
Well, I mean, as you know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And this is a time to pause for awareness about the importance of mental health from childhood and adolescence through entire older adulthood. So, but I want to share with you that mental health conditions are common in the United States. According to the National Institute of Mental Health Illness, 46.6 million in 2017. More than 1.7 million veterans received treatment at the VA mental health hospital. So, I was thinking about on any hot, cold, or rainy or dry day, there are men and women without a roof over their head that are braving our streets. They served our nation, just like you were saying. And who in the world believed that in the richest nation in the world that men and women who served this nation could end up homeless? But I'll just share with you one gentleman Melvin Wilcox. He served in the United States Marine Corps. He's now 60 years old and homeless. And he says that I don't go looking for trouble. I'm not trouble. But it is what it is. And often in Vietnam, you would hear veterans say, shit happens. These are coping skills. Numbing effect responses. So we're survivors, veterans are. And so being a veteran and homeless, you just have to, you just say, hey, it is what it is.
Mm-hmm. And Ms. Monet, so when we talk about mental health and mental illness in general, we tend to generalize or have this idea that the crazy person, the person who's babbling out in the street, wandering, down I-95 or whatever. But the reality is, isn't there different stages or different degrees of different types of mental illness?
Absolutely. There are many different types of mental illness. And, there are a lot of people who are dealing with mental illness who are able to remain housed, right? But VA's research does show that veterans who are facing PTSD or anxiety disorders are more likely than the average veteran to become homeless. So I think one of the really interesting things to think about, right, is what do we do to prevent that? How do we make sure that we're connecting people to the supports and services that they might need, right? How do we make sure that what's offered is enticing and accessible to them? And how do we make sure that if someone is in a crisis and spiraling out of control, we're able to connect them to further resources, whether they're housing related or just mental health related, that can really support them through that crisis.
So what are some of the things that people have access to that can really help them overcome this type of thing? And how do you recognize it? Because I always said and always believed, just from working with homeless people myself in my own life, you can't, it's hard to separate that. You see that disconnection. Talking to a person on the street, you might have no idea that person's homeless. But then when you get to know that person, you realize, okay, this person doesn't have a place to sleep. This is how this person has been coping with this. You know, even members of my own family have gone through this, and even who have been military veterans. So when you talk to to people that go through this, the thing that you come away with is, so what are the tools that they can use in order to help themselves? Now, how do they do that if they're suffering from mental illness? Ms. Monet?
Well, we housed nearly 500 previously homeless veterans at our facility in Houston. And one of the things we do have is an organization called U.S. Vets, which will take the homeless from the street and put them into grant per diem program so that they can learn how to cope with what's going on. They have introduction and access to the VA for assistance with mental health. They're diagnosed. They have clinicians on site, and if they're diagnosed with an issue, they have therapists, and they're available for them. And they also are encouraged to get work for those who can work. And permanent housing, it's sort of a stepping stone for them to go through this grant per diem program and then into permanent housing that's offered by Cloudbreak Houston, which is the facility that I'm talking about that actually houses them with permanent efficiency housing.
Now, how hard was that to start, the Cloud Vest? So when you started Cloudbreak Houston, how did you, pull it together? Because that sounds like a Herculean task to get the money and the funding and the resources to put that together. Mr. Cooper?
Well, it's an effort, a collaborative effort. The first thing you had to do was locate a property, and then take control of that property. We were fortunate enough to find an old Holiday Inn that had been repurposed into a Days Inn, and get the assistance of Representative Sheila Jackson Lee to acquire this property. Then once we acquired it, then we had to do the rehabilitation. That was a very costly thing to do to house them. We have 190 veterans in a brand new facility adjacent to the old one called Travis Street Plaza Apartment, and the Midtown housing. It has 278 units. So, and also on our property, we rent the space to U.S. Vets, and they have 75 units that they utilize for 2 and 3 in a unit. The ones that come off the street, try to put them together to first combat the isolationism, because the veterans really feel alone. But if they're in a unit with another veteran in a similar situation and have that support there, they can mutually help each other as they start to combat homelessness and combat the demons that are there, and they can move forward with the proper treatment and assistance.
Mr. Cooper, and I could be wrong from my own observation, but from what I have seen, looking at across the country in these types of different programs, it seems like the veteran programs for housing have been more successful than a lot of the other programs that have been wrapped around housing and what we call welfare throughout history. So when you compare, for example, what you described just now, it seems like those, for some reason, seem to be more sustainable than some of the other types of housing programs that we've tried to use for for low-income people even. What do you think is the formula that makes veteran programs more successful, or do you see veteran programs being more successful than your typical housing program?
Well, Kathryn knows because she has about 400 different programs across the nation that do this. So, Kathryn, could you jump in here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are a couple of key differences between the veteran system and the civilian system when it comes to helping people experiencing homelessness, right? And I think the one big elephant in the room is that the majority of veterans who are experiencing homelessness have access to VA supports and services, right? They have access to health care and quality mental health care at little to no cost to them, where, civilians might have it if they're eligible for Medicaid, they might not. It's kind of a patchwork system over there. I do think the other thing that has been really beneficial is that in the veteran system, there's a political will, I guess, to expand the toolbox of resources available to veterans in a way that we haven't seen for civilians in a long time. So, for example, for homeless veterans, we continue to get new tranches of housing vouchers that can be used for permanent supportive housing, where the average person who's looking for a Section 8 might be on a wait list waiting for 10 years to get a voucher. We see a lot more resources put towards transitional housing, so the grant and per diem program, like Mr. Cooper said, we've got a lot more of that on the veteran system than they have on the civilian side, for, better or for worse, depending on who you're talking to. I think for the better, because it does give veterans a chance to access mental health and substance use treatment that in certain communities you may not be able to access anywhere else. But I do think that when you look at the homelessness system, dollar for dollar, veterans get more per capita than civilians. So it's just a different kind of system, and I don't know that you can really make an apples-to-apples comparison when you're looking at some of the HUD-funded programs and some of what VA is doing, sometimes in conjunction with HUD.
Mm-hmm. And do you see veterans frequently being able to become self-sufficient where they graduate from the programs that you're talking about? Monet?
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Cooper, do you want to talk more about that? Because I feel like you're closer to
go
that.
Ahead.
Well, I mean, I think we do see a lot of that.
And so what do you think do you think the military mindset helps that process? Or do you think it's more, or you think that it's more of the VA system that kind of facilitates that?
Well, I don't know if it's the mindset, because, I think the veteran has a better chance of survival, especially on the street, simply because we're trained to survive with meager resources. And in combat, you're trained to survive no matter what the circumstance is, and we don't leave anybody behind, and so we're inclined to support each other as opposed to civilian population. Veteran helping veterans is very common among the veterans that we have, the 500 that we have on my site. And yes, we have support, but also in defense of the civilian side, there's a group called SAMHSA. It's a mental health department of our country that really supports homeless, period, whether it's veteran or otherwise, and they have grants available for the veteran population. Anybody interested in trying to start up or trying to rehab a unit to help support housing for veterans also have the VA, which often has grants available, both in purchase and in rehabilitation dollars.
So then how does one get a hold of your organization? So Cloudbreak Houston LLC, what's your social media information, your phone numbers, so that people can reach out? And I'll ask you to repeat that at the end of the interview, because we really need to get more of this information out there, particularly in other parts of the country. And surprisingly, people, I think, a lot of times get neglected. Maybe Ms. Monet, you can speak to this. People in rural areas that have housing insecurity.
Well, that's why National Coalition exists.
So how do we get a hold of you guys? What's your social media information? Website, phone numbers?
So for NCHV, you can reach us at www.nchv.org. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. If you are a veteran that's facing housing instability, you can call our toll-free referral line at 1-800-VET-HELP. Again, that's 1-800-VET-HELP.
I appreciate that. So tell us again, do you have any experience in rural communities, and how does rural communities differ from being in the city? Ms. Monet.
So I think they differ a lot, right? There aren't as many services, and I think rural homelessness tends to look a little bit different because of that sense of community. So you see a lot more doubling up. You see a lot more folks living in places that are not suitable for human habitation, meaning there might not be plumbing or utilities or anything, but they're kind of like in a shed somewhere as opposed to being unsheltered. And so sometimes that makes it a lot more challenging to address those issues because folks who are experiencing rural homelessness are harder to find and harder to serve. There are some programs that are fairly flexible, like VA Supportive Services for Veterans and Families grant, that really provides case management and funding to a person so that they can pay the security deposit first few months of rent. And I do think programs like that are pretty successful in rural communities because it's a lot easier to scale them out, right? So you're putting maybe a case manager there to serve a wide population instead of opening the shelter when you're not quite sure about how many folks will come in and what your inflow will look like.
Do you find that some veterans, or I hear this often, that a lot of veterans don't want or they resist getting that help as if they're getting a handout, or maybe they feel some kind of way, maybe their pride is hurt. Do you run into that often in your work, Ms. Monet?
You know, infrequently. I'll say that the veterans who I've met who are refusing help are generally refusing help because they're like, okay, well, you have a shelter bed and there's a mother 3/10 over with an infant. Like, give that bed to her. I'm fine. I know how to survive outside. I do think there are also times when outreach workers may be reaching out to veterans and they may not have the type of resources that the veteran is looking for, right? So, for example, if they're offering a veteran maybe a bed in a congregate transitional housing setting where, you know, it's a bunch of mats laid out and you're really close to other people, you know, especially now with this pandemic that's been ongoing, that's not as attractive to a veteran as it once may have been. And so oftentimes what you see is either this selfless, like, I've got this outside, help somebody who is more vulnerable, or, you know, someone offering something that doesn't quite meet the veteran's needs, but maybe if you offer them something else that they're looking for, they might be more interested in engaging.
Mr. Cooper, if there is one thing that you would think the military could do, or the VA system could do to make the situation, particularly when it comes to veteran homelessness, better, or alleviate, or to prevent something from happening where someone might become homeless, what would that be?
Well, you hit the nail on the head talking about prevention. And one of the things that I found over the many, many years I've been doing this business is that people don't want to fund prevention. They want the things to already have happened.
What was that you said?
Pardon me?
What did you say? People don't want to do what?
They don't. The funding for prevention is difficult.
Okay.
They'd rather, after the horse has left the barn, they'd rather deal with what's going on that's in front of them. But you're absolutely correct. If I had my druthers, I'd rather us have prevention money. And when a veteran gets ready to exit the military, to spend some time talking about that the real possibility of you ending up homeless because you may not have the support system out there. Now, everybody doesn't have that support system. A lot of men and women who went in the military did so because they don't have very much good support at home and in their community. And so oftentimes the military is their home. And so when they do come out in the streets, they come out sometimes with some baggage. And so if we have situations where we can talk about what you need to do engage in paying your rent? How do you have good living skills is another issue. Because once they become homeless, and oftentimes they don't want to go to a shelter because they'll tell you shelters aren't safe. And so a lot of times they prefer in their own, underneath the bridge or over by themselves. Oftentimes, if they're veterans, combat veterans, especially from the Vietnam era, who called tripwire vets, they want to have their perimeter set, and they know how to survive out there that way. So, but there is never a veteran that I know that's ever said, yes, this is my goal and dream. I've always planned to become a homeless veteran. Right. No. So when the help is there, you have to kind of show them that you will help them move forward. There's nothing a veteran would love to have more than a job and be able to support his family. Oftentimes he's estranged from his family because of homelessness and the other issues, that substance abuse and other mental health issues going on. But they want to be able to contribute, bring home the bacon, so to speak. That is really one of the best mental health remedies that I've found over the years, a job.
I think you hit the nail on the head yourself. I always believe that a job is always one of those things that, for some reason, this keeps people alive. This puts money in your pocket and helps you do better in life when you have a job and have a purpose and have some income coming in. Now, on that note, our economy is changing. So, Ms. Monet, when we look at how prices are rising through inflation, we look at how we're seeing potential future recession on the horizon. The Federal Reserve is planning on raising interest rates even more, which makes borrowing costs more expensive. Housing prices, credit card debt is going to become more expensive in the near future, and it is already. Are you concerned about how this will affect homelessness in the upcoming year?
Absolutely. I mean, it's sort of a combination of factors, right? When you think about inflation, you think about a lot of the COVID protections when it comes to rental assistance and stuff kind of drying up, right? And this sort of return to whatever our new normal is going to be. I think we're going to see a lot of big challenges, and there are many people who anticipate that homelessness will increase a little bit absent any kind of really focused intervention. And I think our partners at VA are trying really hard to push forward a focused intervention and house, I think they said 38,000 veterans by the end of the year. So I think we're all sort of pulling around that goal and working to ensure that everyone in communities across the country has the resources and the know-how that they need to make that a reality.
Wow, 38,000 veterans. Just thinking about that. That's 38,000 people that are in danger of becoming homeless that you guys have your arms wrapped around right now. Is that right?
What was that?
So you have 38,000 veterans that you guys are working with now.
Our audio has gone haywire a little bit.
Well, so it's a national goal, right? It's not only NCHV and our members, it's our partners at VA, our partners at HUD, and everyone in communities across the country, whether they're engaged with NCHV or not, right? I mean, we're all sort of pushing to house that many veterans by the end of the year, and that's a little bit of an increase from last year, but I think a doable and reasonable increase. So I think we're all really hopeful that we'll see some good progress towards that goal by the end of the year.
That's crazy to me because it seems like it's a large number, and that's enough to fill a stadium, and that's a national number because any given night on the street, the number is about 40 to 50,000. But the thing is, it seems like that's something we could tackle if it's a priority. It seems like even though it seems like a huge number, when you look at it from a national perspective, that is something that is not outside of our scope of abilities as a nation to really conquer.
It's not. You're right.
Wow, that's crazy. So one more time, tell us, how do we get a hold of the Cloudbreak Houston LLC, and also what are some of the numbers and social media handles that you can give out so that way people can reach out and get help, especially if they're worried about it next coming year.
The National Coalition is really a great place to sort of triage. So, Kathryn, would you give them the
information you gave out earlier? Can you get that one more time? the contact?
Sure, I can. So our website is www.nchv.org. We are online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And if you're a veteran who's in a housing crisis immediately right now today or imminently soon, you can call us at 1-800-VET-HELP for assistance navigating the system of care in your local community.
This is a question I ask people a lot because Ms. Monet, you're not a veteran, is that right?
I'm not.
Right. So what have you learned working with veterans in your experience in this organization?
A lot of things. I mean, I think what I've learned, well, that's probably a throwaway, like flip answer, right? But I think I've learned a lot, right? And at the end of the day, veterans are just like everybody else, right? They're good people who want to do well for their families and want to be able to have a stable place to live, you know, maybe own a home one day, send their kids to college, and do right by the people around them. And I think it's important that we do what we can to make that a reality for every veteran and really everyone, right? When you think about the veteran system of care, it really is kind of the place that a lot of interventions start, like the test bed for homelessness across the federal government. And when things do well for veterans, HUD looks and they'll start to kind of implement and do some of the same things. And so, you know, what happens for veterans experiencing homelessness matters to so many other people across the country who are facing housing instability.
And I have to ask you this one last question.
A lot of people don't realize. A lot of people don't realize that veterans, even though they're homeless, you still want to let them know that they can own their own home. Mm-hmm. They have a tremendous program, no money down type of program that the VA has for eligible veterans. And people used to laugh at me when I would go out to the different shelters and different places and say, listen, the banks like you now. I can remember a time when banks wouldn't want to see a VA loan coming across their counter because of the paperwork. But now the banks have open arms for a veteran. So, and a homeless veteran doesn't have to be homeless forever. And that was the motto for my original organization, Veterans Benefit Clearinghouse, which I started, was from homelessness to home ownership.
And on that note, Kathryn Monet, Chief Executive Officer for the National Coalition for the Homeless Veterans, and Ralph Cooper, Community and Residential Veteran Services Coordinator of Cloudbreak Houston LLC, and a co-founder of National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. Thanks for your time. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
This is American Serials Group. We'll be right back.